What if I translated it this way? When God began to create the heavens and the earth. You say, well, that's cheating. You can't do that. Yes, I can. I have a PhD in Hebrew. I can do whatever. Clause structure is the key to understanding why Genesis 1:1 through 3 can be taken a variety of ways. That's the key, and that's the thing nobody looks at unless you're a grammar geek, okay? Unless you're somebody who spends time doing, Hebrew things, working in the Hebrew text. Then you're confronted with it immediately. But in English Bibles, it just depends on the translation. A clause is, we kind of think of it as a sentence, a group of related words containing a subject and verb. It may or may not express a complete thought. A verb might be present, or it might be understood. You know about understood subjects and understood verbs, things that just aren't there in the text, but you kind of know because you know English that they belong there. Same thing happens in Hebrew. There are independent clauses, and these are clauses that contain a subject and a verb and express a complete thought. They stand alone. They don't need anything else to express the complete thought. Example. Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. It's a complete thought. It's not giving you the impression that you're missing any information in order to completely understand it. There are dependent clauses, though, that don't stand alone. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, what? It feels like there's something that is supposed to come afterward to complete the idea. Just by adding that one word, it has a sense of incompletion. It has a sense of lacking something else. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, he was able to concentrate. Now we have the full picture. We have the full idea. And in fact, the underlined part here, he was able to concentrate, that actually could stand by itself. You could put something before it, too. His brother stayed away when Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. That gives you a complete, and it gives you a fullness. You're not looking for something else, which is the basic idea. In a dependent situation, a dependent clause, you feel like you've got to have something else to get the full idea. This same situation happens in the first 3 verses of Genesis. There are a series of clauses, and the question is, which ones can stand alone, and which ones depend on the others for their meaning? So the question is, independent or dependent? And once we know that, we'll know what the main idea, the full sentence or sentences, we'll know what the main idea is or isn't. Now here's one way to look at the first 3 verses. I have the second verse in blue for a reason. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. What is the role of verse 2? Does it proceed from verse 1, or does it do something else? Do we have a sequence, a chronology? Or do we have, first verse 1 happens, God creates heavens and the earth. Then the earth was without form and void, as though that's the result of verse 1. And then verse 3 follows. It's a linear sequence. 2 is the result of 1, 3 follows 2. No kidding, Mike, it's 1, 2, 3. All right? Is that the way we're supposed to look at it? Now, traditionally, that is how Genesis 1:1 through 3 has been understood. 2 is the result of verse 1. That's the traditional interpretation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is viewed as the first creative act. God does something in verse 1. The result of that are the conditions we see in verse 2. The writer kind of lets us know what the result of God's creating in verse 1 was. And then he moves on to God getting down to business in verse 3. Okay, so God creates the heavens and the earth, and oh, by the way, when he did that, the earth was formless and empty, and all these conditions. And then God said, "Let there be light," and we get down to business. Okay, that's the traditional way of looking at it. So we have independent clauses in verses 1 and 3 and dependent in 2, and the dependent is the result. That's the relationship. So here I have grayed out in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the translation we're used to. But now let's play around a little bit. What if I translated it this way? When God began to create the heavens and the earth, you say, well, that's cheating. You can't do that. Yes, I can. I have a PhD in Hebrew. I can do whatever. No, seriously, if you look in the Jewish Publication Society translation of Genesis 1:1, that's it. When God began to create the heavens and the earth. Now, is that a complete thought or an incomplete thought? That one's certainly incomplete because it's prepping something to follow. You're being prepped as a reader. So when you put the word when in front of it, you know that it's just leading to something. It's not an independent thought or act. It's leading to one that you haven't gotten to yet. Now let's put them side by side, or I'll get there eventually. We have in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Again, that's the traditional translation that most of us are used to. Hebrew, of course, was not written with any vowels. I have added a vowel here in red. If I was a Hebrew scribe using the vowel system that was invented at around the 8th century A.D., those are the only vowels we have, those little dots and squiggles that you see on a Hebrew text, the vowel system. If I wanted to be sure that my reader would understand I'm talking about the beginning, in the beginning, I would use that little mark that looks like a capital T. And it would be pronounced ba-reshit. That's called in Hebrew the definite article. Just like English definite article, the word for the. Now, if I wanted to opt for when God began, it would look this way. It would be 2 dots underneath. And that means there is no definite article. It's a vocal cue that we don't have a definite article here. That would be be-reshit. Which one do you think is in your Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Bible that like everybody uses now, that has come down to us from centuries ago? The Dead Sea Scrolls do not have vowels. Vowels only start again in the Middle Ages. Which one do you think we get in Hebrew texts that have vowels? It's be-reshit. The translation, when God began to create, is a completely legitimate translation. So let's go back here. We got 2 possible translations. If we opt for the when translation, now look, I've changed the colors. Now we have dependent clauses. We don't have a series of independent ideas. We have 2 full verses of clauses that are leading up to something. And that something is verse 3, and that is the main idea. That's the independent thought. So here, just think about it. Read along with me or in your mind, and just think about how it sounds. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. It really has a different feel. It sounds like everything in verses 1 and 2 are just prep. They're not really happening. They're the writer describing what conditions, now catch this, the writer is describing conditions that already exist before God actually creates anything, before God actually speaks anything into existence. In other words, you have a situation where verses 1 and 2 lead to verse 3, and they set it up. The first creative act, the first thing God does in Genesis 1 through 3 in this view is not verse 1. It's verse 3. That's the very first thing that God speaks into existence. For lack of a better term, I couldn't think of anything that's very witty or alliterated. I put Hebrew syntax view because this is strict Hebrew syntax. Syntax is sentence structure, sentence relationships. If you're going to just go by what the Hebrew says, like a zealot, strictly, obeying the rules of Hebrew grammar, that is what you get.